Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall here. I get to spend the day at the beach, so I thought maybe you want to spend the day at the beach with me. Well, we're in Acts chapter 18, second half. To get you talking, to break the ice, I want to know, was there ever a time when your theology was in great error? Any of you that were maybe raised in the Mormon church, or raised in the Jehovah's Witnesses church, or you didn't believe in the God of the Bible, maybe you didn't believe in God at all, or you believed that God was just like the Santa Claus God. Was there ever a time that your understanding of God was in gross error? Just talk about that a little bit, just to get the time, just to get everybody talking. And then what I'd like to do next is I'd like to talk about this Nazarite vow. It says that Paul took a Nazarite vow. First thing that I think would be helpful to do is just to turn back in your Old Testament, the book of Numbers. That's the fourth book of the Bible. And in the book of Numbers, the 6th chapter, I'd like you to read verses 1 through 6 and then verse 18, just to frame up what this is in the Old Testament. And then I wonder, why do you think that Paul took this vow in Corinth? What do you think that Paul's motivation was to take this Nazarite vow? And then second, on this same subject, do you think that Christians ought to be taking vows? If we bring in Matthew chapter 5, what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount in verses 33 through 37, does this conflict with Paul's actions in the book of Acts here in the 18th chapter? Nazarite vows. Well, next, look at verse 22. That says that it says in verse 22 that Paul went up and greeted the church, and then he went down to Antioch. Now, there's most assuredly, this is the church in Jerusalem. And Antioch is where Paul started his missionary journey. Antioch is now headquarters. It's his sending place. Why do you think that Paul went back to Jerusalem first, before he went to Antioch? What do you think his motivation was to go back to Jerusalem? And then, not a question, but an important note. It says in verse 33 that Paul left Antioch and he begins his third missionary journey. I just want you to note this in your mind, maybe even in your Bible. He has left Antioch once and for all. This is the third and last missionary journey. Paul will not return. Tradition holds that he will die in Rome at the end of this missionary journey. This will take us all the way through the rest of the book of Acts. Now, next, I'd like you to spend some time discussing Apollos. What was his background? What was his training? How do you interpret the words? It says there that he taught Jesus accurately, but he only knew the baptism of John the Baptist. How is that possible? What do you think that he knew or understood about Jesus? And what do you think that Priscilla and Aquila did to correct him? And then last, I'd like to talk about Priscilla. The fact that her name is given first is significant. When we read Greek literature, the first name is always the name of importance. It certainly means that she took part and probably led the conversation with Apollos, which means that she was teaching Apollos with her husband Aquila. How does this fact affect your understanding of what it says in 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 12 and in 1 Corinthians chapter 14 verse 34 about women teaching men? It seems to me that the activities of Priscilla make it difficult to make those prohibitions about women not teaching men a universal truth. We generally say that women should never teach men because of these two passages. But I wonder, what does this story about Priscilla teaching Apollos, how does it affect that in your mind? Well, every week I want you to talk about what you like and what you don't like. I think that Paul grew out his hair so that in Corinth, remember Corinth was the Las Vegas of his day, that in Corinth he stood out. And I think that's what Paul wanted to do. He wanted to stand out so that he could tell people when they asked, hey, dude, what's with all the hair and the beard? He could tell people about the God of the Bible. I think there's something powerful sometimes about when we stand out. We put a fish on our car, or we play Christian radio on our computer at work at our desk, or we wear Christian t-shirts. Sometimes I think that there is value in standing out for Christ. What do I dislike? I'll be honest with you, I reread this whole passage trying to find something that I dislike, but there's really not much to dislike in this passage. Paul was successful, Priscilla and Aquila are successful, Apollos is successful. I like it. What's the application? Just remember what I'm wanting you to be working on this week. We want to be fat Christians, faithful, approachable, teachable. Sometimes swallowing that much, well, that could make us sick. And so I challenge you to think about one. Where's the first step or the next step for you in being a fat Christian? For some of you, it's being faithful this week. It's turning away from some sinful behavior in your life. For some of you, it's being approachable this week. It's letting down your guard. It's stepping into Christian circles or stepping closer to Christian friends or even strangers, being approachable. And for some, it's being teachable. That I open myself, I ask people, what needs to change in me? Well, I hope that you have a great group, and I look forward to seeing you next weekend for the next step in the book of Acts. God bless.